For centuries, the Shroud of Turin has been called history's greatest forgery, but new 21st century science suggests we've been dead wrong. Today, we're reopening the cold case of the Shroud of Turin. You're going to see the groundbreaking forensic evidence, from advanced X-ray scattering to unique biological markers that are dismantling decades of skepticism and pointing toward a startling, ancient reality. In 1988, a single carbon dating test supposedly closed the book on the shroud, but a recent revolution in research has revealed that the original verdict was based on a fatal error, turning a settled debate into the most significant scientific mystery of our time. This detail changes everything, because for decades the world believed the 1988 test was infallible. 3 prestigious labs, 1 clear date, the Middle Ages. Case closed. But what if I told you that they weren't actually dating the shroud at all? Let's dive in.
Researchers, including a chemist from the original 1978 science team named Ray Rogers, proved that the sample given to the labs wasn't from the main body of the shroud at all. It was from a corner that had been expertly rewoven centuries later to repair fire damage. It had cotton fibers mixed in, which you don't find anywhere else on the cloth. The bottom line, they dated a medieval patch, not the original shroud. The test was totally invalid.
If you don't want to miss out on invite you to the channel. If you don't want to miss out on any future deep dives on this channel, please join us by subscribing and hitting that notification bell.
So with the prosecution's star witness, that C14 test, completely discredited, the case is suddenly wide open again. Scientists now needed a new, much more reliable way to date the cloth, a method that couldn't be fooled by contamination or centuries-old repairs. And that's where something called wax dating comes in. Now, instead of looking at carbon isotopes, which we now know can be contaminated, wide-angle X-ray scattering looks at the very structure of the linen fibers themselves. Think of it like a structural clock. Over hundreds and thousands of years, the cellulose and linen breaks down at a very predictable rate. Wax measures that decay, allowing scientists to determine the age of the fabric with incredible accuracy. Okay, let's break this down, because the difference here is night and day. The 1988 test used a destructive method on a contaminated sample from a repaired corner. Wax, on the other hand, is non-destructive, totally resistant to contamination, and was used on a thread from the main body of the cloth. And the result? It's a bombshell. The structural age of the shroud's linen isn't 700 years, it's about 2,000 years old, placing it squarely in the 1st century AD. And look, this isn't just a one-off test. We've got multiple, totally independent lines of evidence, all pointing to the exact same time and place. The weave of the cloth, a 3-to-1 herringbone twill, was once thought to be medieval. Well, now we found identical weaves at 1st century sites like Masada. Isotopic analysis proves the flax was grown in the Levant, not in Europe. And maybe most compellingly, the cloth is covered in pollen grains from plants that grow only in and around Jerusalem. The evidence for time and place is simply overwhelming. All right, so we've established the when and the where. 1st century Judea, the evidence is solid. So now the investigation has to turn from the cloth to the man wrapped inside it. And the next question is inescapable. Who is he? The forensic evidence here is just as precise, and it tells a truly brutal story. First things first, the blood is real. This isn't paint, not by a long shot. It's actual human blood, type AB. But recent analysis has found something astonishing inside it. Extremely high levels of creatinine and ferritin. These are biological markers that only show up in the blood of someone who has suffered severe, prolonged physical trauma. Torture. This wasn't a healthy person. This was a man who was viciously brutalized before he died. Okay, now let's talk about the wounds. This is absolutely mind-blowing. For centuries, every painting and sculpture has shown crucifixion nails going through the palms of the hands. But we know from a forensic standpoint, the palms can't support the weight of a body. The shroud correctly shows the nail wound in the wrist, in the precise anatomical location called distant space needed to hold a man on a cross. This is a detail a medieval forger would have had no idea about, yet it's exactly what we see. And here is a crucial forensic detail: the timeline. The analysis shows without a doubt that the blood got on the cloth first, and the body image was formed second. You see, the image does not exist underneath the blood clots. This simple fact makes any theory of a painting a practical impossibility. It would mean an artist somehow painted the bloodstains first in perfect position and then created the body image around them without disturbing a single clot. It just doesn't work. And just when you think the case can't get any stronger, a second witness walks into the room. It's another artifact called the Sudarium of Oviedo in Spain. It's a face cloth, believed to have covered the head of Jesus after his death, and it has a paper trail going all the way back to Jerusalem in the year 614 AD, centuries before the shroud was supposedly faked. Now, there's no image on the Sudarium, just bloodstains. But here's the kicker. Forensic analysis found over 120 points of direct correspondence between the bloodstains on the Sudarium and the wounds on the head of the man in the shroud. Both have type AB blood. This second witness is a confirmed forensic match. So, we've nailed down the when, the where, and we have a very clear profile of the victim. But now we have to face the biggest mystery of them all, the image itself, because how it was formed defies every known artistic or natural process we have. Right, so let's rule things out, one by one. We know it's not a painting. There's zero pigment, no brush strokes, nothing. It's not a scorch from a hot statue. It doesn't fluoresce under UV light like a scorch would. The image is unbelievably superficial. It's just a discoloration of the very top microfibers of the linen, about 0.2 micrometers deep. That's shallower than any paint could ever be. And then there's the impossible part. It contains 3D data. The lights and darks of the image perfectly correspond to the distance the cloth was from the body, which is how scientists were able to create a perfect three-dimensional model from it. So, if it's not a painting, not a scorch, not a rubbing, then what in the world is it? Well, the only scientific model that even comes close to replicating the image's unique properties involves a burst of radiation. Specifically, a brief, powerful burst of something called vacuum ultraviolet, or VUV radiation. It's the only thing that can discolor linen to that incredibly shallow depth. But there's a catch, a huge one. According to the Italian physicists who actually replicated this effect on a tiny scale, creating a full-body image like the one on the shroud would require 34 trillion watts of VUV radiation. That is a power output greater than every single power plant on Earth combined. Let that sink in. No known natural or artificial source could have possibly produced that kind of energy. This leads to a wild Gary from physicist Dr. John Jackson, which he calls a fall-through event. To explain the perfect vertical 3D data and the fact that the blood isn't smeared at all, he theorizes that at the very moment the image was formed, the body itself became mechanically transparent. The cloth, no longer supported, would have collapsed under its own weight, passing through the space the body once occupied. And as it fell through, that burst of radiation encoded the image. It is, essentially, a physics-based model for what theology calls the resurrection. So where does all this leave us? Well, let's look at the final piece of the puzzle. The impact this evidence had on the actual scientists who studied it. And you have to remember, these weren't men of faith trying to prove a belief. They were mostly agnostic and skeptical scientists just trying to solve a puzzle. Take Barry Schwartz. He was the official photographer for that big 1978 science team. He was a non-religious Jew, and as he puts it, he had no horse in this race. He went into the project fully expecting to expose a clever painting and go home. He came out so completely convinced by the data that he spent the rest of his life defending the shroud's authenticity. And he wasn't the only one. Dr. John Jackson, who discovered the 3D data, Ray Rogers, the chemist who debunked the C14 test, so many on that team started out as total skeptics. They didn't have some religious conversion. They were backed into an intellectual corner by the data itself. The evidence, quite simply, could not be explained by any known naturalistic or artistic means. And so, our investigation comes to a close, and it leaves us with one final question. It's a question for you. If all the scientific evidence points to a burial cloth from 1st century Jerusalem, a cloth that wrapped a man who was tortured and crucified in a uniquely Roman fashion, whose blood tells a forensic story of extreme trauma, and whose body left that cloth by dematerializing in a burst of radiation that modern science cannot replicate, what event known to history fits all of that data? The evidence rests.